on a rain-drenched plain near the small village of Crécy in northern France, on August 26, 1346. Some 9,000 fatigued English soldiers steeled themselves for an impossible stand against an army of 30,000, the pride of European chivalry. The French force radiated supremacy, vastly outnumbering their foes. Armed with the era's most formidable heavy cavalry, and led by the elite of continental nobility, their confidence bordered on arrogance. High-born lords jostled over who would claim the prestige of vanquishing England's king. Yet, in a mere 4 hours, the sodden field painted a starkly different picture. Over 1,500 French aristocrats lay dead, counts, dukes, and princes among them, while the English mourned fewer than 50 men. In one brutal afternoon, the centuries-old reign of armored knights collapsed, undone by humble archers wielding yew and hemp. A sightless monarch charged blindly into a deadly hail. French nobles, in their desperation to flee, crushed their own allies underfoot. Genoese mercenaries, hired to bolster the assault, were slaughtered by the very lords who employed them. For weeks, carrion birds grew so glutted on noble flesh they could scarcely take wing. This was the Battle of Crécy, the day medieval warfare drowned in the mud, when the myth of noble invincibility shattered under the volleys of peasant bowmen, marking a turning point in the 100 Years' War, with France's most devastating defeat. By the end of this tale, you'll grasp how a weapon worth mere shillings dismantled armor costing fortunes, why French knights betrayed their own mercenaries mid-battle, and how a blind king's doomed charge became a poignant symbol of fading chivalry. The stage is set. King Edward III of England had landed in Normandy in July 1346 with an army of approximately 14,000 men, pressing his claim to the French throne through his mother, Isabella of France, a descendant of the Capetian dynasty. His campaign, known as a chevauchée, was a calculated act of devastation, designed to undermine King Philip VI's legitimacy by exposing his inability to protect his people. English troops razed villages, torched crops, and drove off livestock, leaving a trail of smoldering ruin across northern France. After sacking Caen, a prosperous trading hub, they looted its wealth. Chronicles, like Jean Froissart's estimate, the haul included thousands of pounds of silver and jewels before retreating toward Calais, an English-controlled port. It was here, near Crécy, that Philip's massive army cornered them. Historical records, including English muster rolls and French chronicles, like the Chronicle of Saint-Amour, estimate Philip's force at 25,000 to 35,000 men, including 12,000 mounted knights clad in state-of-the-art plate armor, their war horses similarly protected. This was no ordinary army, but a coalition of Europe's martial elite. French nobles, from the Duke of Alencon to the Count of Blois, were joined by allies from across Christendom, contingents from the Holy Roman Empire, knights from Navarre, and even the famed King John of Bohemia, blind yet revered for his martial prowess. The coalition's goal was singular: obliterate the English invaders and restore French honor. The French knight was the pinnacle of medieval warfare, a living fortress. A fully armored knight and his destrier, draped in steel or padded caparisons, weighed nearly 2,000 pounds. Custom-forged plate armor, often costing over 100 pounds, equivalent to a small manor's annual income. When a laborer earned less than £2 yearly, was a status symbol as much as protection. Raised from childhood in the arts of war, lance, sword, and horsemanship, knights were the era's ultimate weapon. For 5 centuries, their thunderous charges had decided battles, trampling infantry and shrugging off arrows. Archers were dismissed as irritants. True glory lay in mounted, noble combat. Edward faced grim odds. Outnumbered at least 3-1, his men were weary from weeks of raiding, their provisions nearly spent. Yet he held a secret weapon, 5,000 longbowmen, primarily Welsh, and English yeomen, many of low birth or criminal pasts, forged into lethal marksmen by England's rigorous archery laws. Statutes from Edward's reign, notably the 1363 archery law, mandated weekly practice for all men aged 16 to 60, banning competing sports like football under penalty of imprisonment. The longbow, a 6-foot stave of yew, was a marvel of simplicity and power. With a draw weight of 100 to 180 pounds, it required extraordinary strength. Archaeological evidence reveals longbowmen skeletons with elongated left arms and thickened shoulder bones from decades of strain. A skilled archer could loose 10 to 12 arrows per minute, striking targets at 250 yards with force capable of piercing chainmail or exploiting gaps in plate armor. Strategic preparations. Edward chose his ground with precision, positioning his army on a low ridge overlooking the Crécy plain, forcing the French to attack uphill through rain-soaked soil. He organized his forces into 3 divisions, with archers arranged in a V-shaped formation to create overlapping fields of fire, maximizing their lethality. In a revolutionary move, he ordered his knights to dismount and fight as infantry, a decision that shocked his own ranks. The Chronicle of Flanders notes the incredulity among English nobles, whose war horses, valued at up to 100 pounds each, were relegated to the rear. Edward's logic was rooted in the longbow's potential. A static defense, anchored by disciplined archers, could neutralize the French cavalry's momentum. His men transformed the slope into a death trap, digging shallow pits to trip horses, planting sharpened stakes to impale chargers, and fortifying their lines with earthworks. As night fell, the English camp exuded quiet resolve. Archers waxed their bowstrings with beeswax to repel moisture, while soldiers shared meager rations of bread, cheese, and Aylward's orders ensured every man ate, boosting morale. Torches flickered as stakes were driven and trenches deepened. Across the valley, the French camp was a study in contrast, a dazzling display of disarray. Nobles paraded in polished armor, their banners emblazoned with heraldic lions, eagles, and lily-whipping in the gale. Lords like the Count of Sancerre and the Duke of Lorraine vied for prominence, each eager to capture Edward for ransom or glory. Philip VI struggled to impose discipline, his commands drowned by horns, drums, and aristocratic bravado. The French resembled a tournament of egos, not a unified army. The battle erupts, dawn broke under brooding skies. A sudden deluge turned the field into a quagmire, ankle-deep in mud. The French, confident in their impervious armor, scoffed at the rain. But, for missile troops, the storm was pivotal. English archers tucked their bowstrings under cloaks or helmets, preserving their tautness. The 6,000 Genoese crossbowmen, hired at a cost of roughly 2 florins per man, daily a sum drawn from French treasury records, were less fortunate. Their crossbows, strung with hemp or sinew, slackened in the wet, slashing their range to under 100 yards, compounding their vulnerability. Their pavises, large wooden shields used for cover while reloading, remained stranded with the baggage train, leaving them exposed. Philip, arriving in the late afternoon after a grueling march, ordered his army to halt and rest until dawn. Exhausted, His men needed time to regroup, but patience was alien to the French nobility. Seeing the English arrayed atop the hill, seemingly ripe for defeat, they defied orders. Lords like the Count of Alencon lowered their lances, shouting of honor and ransoms. Others followed, unwilling to let rivals claim the prize. Philip's authority dissolved in a clamor of ambition. The French host transformed into a chaotic swarm, each noble racing to outstrip the others. The battle ignited, not with strategy, but with reckless pride. The Genoese crossbowmen advanced first, tasked with softening the English lines. At 150 yards, they loosed a volley, but their sodden strings faltered, bolts dropping harmlessly short. The English response was cataclysmic. 5,000 longbows unleashed a barrage 60,000 arrows per minute. A storm so dense it obscured the sky, as chronicler Jean Labelle described, like snow in a blizzard. The Genoese, shieldless and outpaced, were decimated. A crossbow took 20 seconds to reload, a longbow 5. Unable to withstand the onslaught, the mercenaries fled directly into their own lines. In a shocking betrayal, French knights, enraged by the retreat, turned on their allies. The Count of Alencon, bellowing accusations of cowardice, led a charge that hacked through the Genoese, killing hundreds. Italian chronicler Giovanni Villani later condemned this disgraceful slaughter, noting the mercenaries' cries of betrayal. Those who survived abandoned the field, vowing never to serve the French again. Now the main assault surged forward, 12,000 mounted knights charging uphill through mud, over fallen Genoese, into a relentless arrow storm. The longbow's terror revealed itself. At long-range, arrows targeted horses, piercing eyes, throats, or unarmored flanks. A 1,500-pound destrier, struck by multiple shafts, collapsed, pinning its rider or blocking those behind. At closer range, under 100 yards, bodkin-tipped arrows, designed with narrow steel points, could pierce plate armors, weaker joints, visors, armpits, or groins. Even non-penetrating hits delivered crushing force, rattling knights like pebbles in a tin. The French charged repeatedly, perhaps 15 times, each wave climbing over corpses and wreckage. Edward's terrain, trapspits, stakes, and mud became executioners. Fallen knights, weighed down by 60-pound armor, lay helpless, drowned in mire or skewered by stakes. English archers, with arrows pre-planted for speed, maintained a merciless rhythm, retrieving shafts from the dead to sustain the barrage. Amid this chaos, King John of Bohemia, blind for nearly a decade due to a progressive eye condition, likely cataracts, per medical historians, refused to retreat. Aged 50, he declared, as recorded by Froissart, "The King of Bohemia shall not flee," ordering his knights to tether their horses to his furs. He charged toward the sound of battle, swinging his sword at unseen foes. He and his escort were cut down instantly, their bodies found bound together, John's sword still clutched, eyes fixed in defiance. Edward's son, the Black Prince, aged 16, was so moved by this valor that he adopted John's emblem, 3 ostrich feathers. By dusk, the French had exhausted themselves. Philip VI, struck in the jaw by an arrow and unhorsed, was dragged from the field by his guards. The sacred oriflamme, a crimson banner symbolizing divine favor, lay abandoned in the mud. Humiliation chronicled across Europe. English archers, their quivers empty, waded into the carnage, wielding knives, mallets, and stakes to dispatch stranded knights. Peasant bowmen clubbed noblemen to death, a scene unimaginable in prior centuries. Aftermath and impact. Dawn on August 27th revealed a field littered with over 1,500 noble dead, including the Duke of Lorraine, the Count of Blois, the Count of Sancerre, and 9 other princes, per the Chronicle of Normandy. English losses were astonishingly low, perhaps 40 men, with only 2 knights among them. The disparity baffled contemporaries. Some, like monk Thomas Walsingham, called it divine intervention. The truth was tactical. Disciplined archers, fortified terrain, and Edward's foresight annihilated a pride-driven foe. Crécy's deeper wound was social. Medieval warfare thrived on ransoming nobles' captives were wealth, not corpses. A duke's ransom could fetch £10,000, enough to fund a campaign. But English archers, unbound by chivalric codes, killed indiscriminately, piercing visors and felling lords without pause. This shattered the nobility's aura of divine superiority. A Welsh yeoman with a 10-shilling bow could slay a duke in 100 pounds armor, appending the feudal order. French society staggered. Entire provinces lost their lords. Governance collapsed, and the army required rebuilding. Philip's court scrambled, hiring crossbowmen and forming native archer corps, reluctantly adopting English tactics. Yet, as the 1356 Battle of Poitiers proved, France repeated Crécy's mistakes, losing another king to archers. The longbow's reign, while transformative, was fleeting. Its mastery required lifelong training, and by the late 15th century, gunpowder, weapons, muskets, and arquebuses, usable by novices, began eclipsing it. Crécy heralded the rise of ranged warfare, where positioning, discipline, and firepower trumped valor. It also sparked social questions. If peasants could fell nobles, what justified aristocratic rule? The seeds of feudalism's decline were sown in that muddy field. The aftermath was grotesque. Unburied corpses rotted under the August sun, scavenged by locals who stripped armor, swords, and jewels, turning peasants into overnight profiteers. Rusted helms and bones surfaced in farmers' fields for decades, grim relics of chivalry's end. The English marched on to besiege Calais, leaving a field so strewn with noble dead it was dubbed the Field of the Cloth of Gold for the shimmering garments blanketing the slain. Crécy's legacy endures in military history. Historians like Anne Curry and Clifford Rogers view it as a revolution, proving tactics and technology could crush numbers and courage. It birthed principles of modern warfare, defensive positioning, coordinated firepower, and adaptability over tradition. Yet the most haunting image remains: French knights, the pride of Christendom, trampling their own Genoese to reach the enemy, only to perish under a peasant-driven arrow-storm. The Count of Alencon, who ordered the mercenaries' slaughter, was himself struck through the visor moments later. Crows, gorged on noble flesh, waddled amid the carnage, too heavy to flay, a grotesque symbol of a fallen elite. Today, a modest monument marks the Crécy field, rarely visited. Yet, on August 26, 1346, that muddy slope witnessed the medieval world's collapse. 5 centuries of knightly dominance ended, slain by commoners with yew and string. The English didn't just win a battle. They proved nobility could not withstand mathematics, that courage could not stop arrows, and that the age of chivalry was dead. France lost more than Menet, lost faith in its divinely ordained order. All to 5,000 archers trained on village greens. If epic tales of history's turning points captivate you, Share your thoughts below. Subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Let's uncover more battles that reshaped the world.